This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders. January 16th, 2023 might have marked the most seismic Tuesday lunchtime in Welsh rugby history, as in the space of 11 minutes, 5 new call-ups were selected. Dav Jenkins was named the youngest squad captain in the Welsh rugby team's near 150-year history, and Louis Rees-Zammit, the biggest star Welsh rugby's produced in a decade, arguably one of the nation's best-known, most celebrated young sportsmen since Gareth Bale, Sam Warburton and Geraint Thomas stumbled out of the same school back a decade ago, and front and centre of all Six Nations marketing efforts coming up over the next few weeks, announced he was quitting the sport to pursue a place in the NFL. The Rugby to NFL National Football League American Football and NFL to Rugby pipeline has long since been a fascinating one, mostly because it doesn't really exist. A lot is often made of the similarities between the two sports, yet the links between them exist more in YouTube comments complaining that one is tougher to play than the other than in athletes actually hopping back and forth between the two. And yet, the two games do remain in many ways eternally tied together and have a long lineage of players jumping between one and the other. The sports we now know as rugby union and American football truly diverged in 1882 when the latter introduced the free downs format. Yet, for some time, even after that, players still bounced between the two sports pretty freely. Rugby was still a big deal, particularly in colleges in America, and those who favoured American football might find themselves in a town where the old-style, more traditional rugby rules that they've been brought over from Britain were more popular and opted to play them instead, or vice versa. A rugby player might find themselves in a football town and start playing by American rules. It was like switching from playing Call of Duty to playing Halo. There's a big difference, sure, but broadly, if you're good at one, you'll likely still be pretty good at the other. The big change came, however, around the turn of the century as payment for playing American football became more and more common, yet rugby in the US was forced to stick to the sport's hallowed, enshrined love of amateurism, the greatest force for good in the world. In those days, to accept money to play rugby was the biggest eschewing of rugby values one could possibly perform. It was strictly banned, and seeing as Bill Beaumont would have been, mid-40s back then, he probably still could have come around your house and beat you up if he found out about it. So it was off the table. And slowly but surely, all of America's best contact sport athletes chose the game that was able to remunerate them for their efforts. And rugby, to a greater or lesser degree, died off across the United States. The games would grow apart over the following few decades. The forward pass legalised in 1906 and the downs concept revolutionising the way the game was played, wedging apart defence and offence into two totally separate disciplines. It was only really in the 80s, as global TV started to become more regular and the world get that little percentage point smaller, that we started to see crossovers happening once again. Despite every commentator over the tournament praising Team USA's gridiron style, the American team at the inaugural Rugby World Cup featured just one legit cross-code athlete. Fred Powley had huge success as defensive lineman at Colorado State before chasing a legal career instead of a football one, and rugby's amateur nature allowed him to convert and play at the top level, playing prop for the USA in the first 2 World Cups, whilst having a separate professional career. However, the first significant move in the opposite direction, and almost certainly the biggest name in rugby to attempt the switch before Rees-Zammit, came in 1996, when Scotland legend Gavin Hastings signed for NFL Europe team the Scottish Claymores, which was briefly a thing, 1 year after retiring from rugby. Hastings had been one of rugby's greatest goal kickers of his era, so seemed worth a punt in a sport where kickers didn't need to do anything else at all. They could just come on and kick and nothing else. He nailed 24 of 28 kicks, but only lasted the 1 season before he was cut from the books. Nonetheless, he set a precedent. Over the next few decades, Neil Jenkins, Ronan O'Gara, Lee Halfpenny and Dan Carter, all huge names in rugby in their time, would all turn down contracts from NFL teams to go and convert and become specialised kickers. However, over the last few years, as the world has got smaller still, the NFL international player pathway and professional opportunities in rugby, be it the allure of the Olympic Games, MLR, or teams such as the American Raptors set up specifically to help crossover athletes adapt to rugby, have seen an increased quantity of players moving in both directions. Before Zammo, the most notable of these was perhaps, from a rugby perspective at least, Christian Wade, one of the Premiership's all-time top try scorers with 1 England appearance to his name, who signed for the Buffalo Bills in 2018. And it started incredibly well. A 65-yard touchdown in his first ever play in his first game before failing to then make the main squad and spending 3 years on the practice roster, only playing in pre-season games before returning to rugby with Racing 92 in 2022.
And yet, Wade's appetite wasn't satiated, as he also headed to Squarespace. Now based in Paris, Christian Wade found himself desperate for things to do and wanted to share them with the world. Having attempted a HTML blog a few years back for his American experience, Wade instead opted to use Squarespace's easy-to-use, simple features. And boy, did he have a beautiful website in no time at all, able to integrate the blog to a homepage, build other pages, build all sorts, and then on the blog itself, bring in all sorts of things, incorporate videos, incorporate bloody pictures, integrate graphs that he wanted to bring in, because he loves graphs as Christian Wade. Christian Wade loves graphs. And if you want to do the same, right, and build your own website, blog or otherwise, please head to the link in the description and use the offer code SquidRugby to save yourself some money on a beautiful new website that can be used by your American fans, your French fans, your British fans, your fans from all over the world to come and visit you and look at your adventures that you're having.
Wade made waves because he was a bigger name in union, yet the path is littered with other noble failures. Athletes who showed that they could play two sports, just maybe not one of them to the equal level of their first sport. Former London Irish and Newcastle forward Alex Gray had a very similar stint at the Atlanta Falcons. Practice squad before it all fell apart, he went back to rugby and then ended up somehow on the new season of Gladiators. While owner of the poshest name this side of Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the British Empire, Sir William Blackledge Beaumont, commander of the most excellent Order of the British Empire, Deputy Lieutenant Lancashire, Christian Scotland Williamson, also had a 3-year run in a practice squad without ever really getting proper game time, while Hayden Smith had slightly more success. A USA international already, he left a successful club career at Saracens in rugby to join the New York Jets, and actually did make the active roster, even catching a pass in a full NFL game, yet was cut again after just one season in that squad, returning to Sarries 18 months after he first left them. And moves in the opposite direction have generally come up short too. University of Arizona college football man Sione Tuihalamaka had a brief pro career in American football outside of the NFL divisions before sliding between clubs in MLR on a near-annual basis, while former defensive tackle Garland McDowell signed with Nola Gold last year in the hope of becoming a tight end prop, but is yet to play a pro match for the franchise. There have been a couple of rugby league players who've also transitioned. Jordan Mailata of the Philadelphia Eagles is probably the IPP's biggest success story to date, while scumbag rapist Jared Hayne bumped between codes a few years back. A big success in rugby league, a short-lived success in the NFL, a failure in rugby sevens, then 4 years in prison with a piece of shit's career deserved to end. Instead, if you want to look at athletes who have managed to play both sports to a genuinely successful level, as Rees-Zammit is hoping to do, kind of predictively, you almost exclusively end up staring at those who played both sports in their early and teenage years. Paul Lasike, for example, grew up playing rugby before moving to Sacramento as a teenager, where, much like the 1890s generation before him, he was forced to convert code about a rugby team nearby. He excelled in his new sport, going on to spend 3 years with the Chicago Bears before happily shifting back to rugby after a decade out of the game. Inside a year of doing so, he was called up by the USA national team and signed for Harlequins in England, where he scored 5 tries on 26 appearances. While current US Eagle Son Woo-Ching was a highly successful linebacker at the University of Washington before declining NFL practice squad spots to play his proclaimed first love of rugby union, where he's made a very solid career, gone to play for the Eagles and captain the San Diego Legion, before going to sign for a club in France this year. But maybe the most successful of the lot was Nate Ebner. A junior rugby prodigy, Ebner skipped college football in the name of the Gilbert before being offered a scholarship for his final year if only he would focus on goddamn football. Ebner was a sensation there. Drafted by the New England Patriots a year later, he would go on to be part of the Super Bowl winning Patriots side of 2014 before switching back to rugby in 2016 to play in the inaugural Olympic Sevens before returning to the Patriots to win another Super Bowl in 2017 and in a third in 2018 before a final stint back in rugby after calling time in his football career, injury and the COVID postponement ultimately costing him a place at the 2020 Olympics. Since retiring from sport altogether, he's become part owner of MLR's New England Free Jacks, who won their first championship title last year. The only exceptions in either direction, really, are those who pretty much just traded on one exceptional skill. Colin Iles and Perry Baker both left middling football careers for rugby sevens, where their pace allowed them to excel. Baker in particular, who's a phenomenal sevens player, while Gary Anderson and Richard Tardis, who had a career that's very much bigger on the inside, were nobodies in union, had very successful 90s NFL careers based on one outstanding skill they learnt playing junior rugby, goal kicking and the sack, respectively. Louis Rees-Zammit is comfortably the best rugby player to ever attempt a move to the NFL. The players I I've listed are, for fans of both sports, kind of deep cuts. Athletes you'll only remember if you're a huge fan of either one of their teams or really tricky pub quiz questions. Players who figured, why not? They weren't giving up on any dreams or calling time in a fruitful, exceptional career for a gamble, like others who may have been given this chance before Zammo may have been. The link between the two sports has always existed more in YouTube comments, yet LRZ might give us our best ever chance at answering some of those questions being posed in sections like down below. For the first time ever, a top level player from either game is about to jump ship to the other, and at the peak of their powers as well. Rees-Zammit is 22 years old and has spoken of how big an NFL fan his father was his entire life. He may not have played it as a teenager, but having been around it, having watched it, and having a working knowledge of the game beyond watching half of any given Sunday on ITV3 over Christmas will help enormously, and not something that a lot of people who jump between one sport and the other have always had. Because herein lies the rub. In rugby union, the sport, league aside, that seems most likely to produce the best convert players isn't another physical collision sport, but association football, soccer, normal football, if you will. Whilst the likes of Danny Kerr, Shane Williams, Marcus Smith, I could go on forever, endless numbers played both as kids, we have a significant number like Aaron Wainwright, Ryan Jones, Alex Azowski, Mark Cueto, Chris Latham, bizarrely Rabis Limani, who were all extremely good junior footballers and only started playing rugby after the age of 16. This conversion has generally been more successful because whilst the bruises received in rugby union and American football might be more similar than those you might get playing other sports, the types of intelligence that makes great rugby players and great association footballers are much more similar than the types of intelligence that make great rugby players and great American footballers, with the added benefit that most of the players I just named are either posh or Welsh, so probably grew up watching both sports anyway. Rugby union is an attrition sport. The same players execute every task. They play for 80 minutes and you have to make decisions live in the moment, just as in our football, soccer. NFL, on the other hand, is an incredibly reactive game. The intelligence required to make it the top level is about your twitch muscles, your speed of thought in one moment, and ability to keep calm in tiny moments and execute, instead of the prolonged experience of putting you under pressure and trying to make you worse and worse that we see in British sports. It helps as well that the conditioning required is so much more similar between rugby and football because of the continuous nature of both games. American football athletes are built to play in short bursts versus having to last up to 5 or 6 minutes at a time, with play going back and forth and your roles changing constantly between attack, defence, kick, chase, all the rest of it. So much of rugby is about scanning, reading the game live, looking for space in behind, just as on a football field, rather than watching your opponent and trying to work out what they're doing one-to-one, as becomes the case in American football. It leads to two games that are only superficially similar. The experience of playing is incredibly different on everything but the body. Rees-Zammit is tall, he's strong, he's an incredible hard worker, and he's bloody exceptionally fast. And crucially, right, this isn't a track athlete switching over, this is a guy used to sprinting in cleats. And whilst wearing pads and a helmet might be new, the pace and hunger should see him in pretty good stead. The truth of the matter is, right, looking at the complete history of the comparison between rugby union and American football, the complete history of players who jump between one game and the next, we have absolutely no idea how Rees-Zammit will get on in the USA. There's never been a rugby athlete of his calibre who's made this kind of decision, especially not at this stage of their career. If any rugby athlete has ever been set up to make the jump and make it successfully, it's probably Louis Rees-Zammit right now. But also, no rugby athlete has ever been set up to make this jump. And it is worth noting as well that across the board, each of the players I listed, when they did inevitably return to rugby 1, 2, 3, 4 years later, their careers were never quite the same. Regular starters became bit part players. Players struggled to get contracts and ended up on gladiators. And you've got to hope, if things don't go according to plan, Rees-Zammit doesn't suffer a similar fate. Because ultimately, this was always a gamble, but a bloody exciting one. That very eventful Tuesday lunchtime left us with plenty of questions, but most of all, it gave us even more to be intrigued, excited, and downright fascinated over the next couple of years in two very different sports. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is coming to you for the first time from the brand new Squid Rugby office. We just moved in the last week. That was a quick thing put together after, the surprise Zammo announcement last week. We've got plenty more coming ahead of the Six Nations. Please, if you're perhaps an NFL fan who stumbled across this, please have a look around. There's loads more in rugby, and hopefully you'll enjoy some of it. If you are a rugby person who is fascinated mildly by that, then please have a look around. Maybe you'll find something to be fascinated slightly
more mildly, slightly more towards like an average level of mild fascination. I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you very soon for more stuff from right here.
Let's go! Let's go, baby! Let's go! Let's go! When you get in the open field, what I told you. All right?
Play rugby.
When you get in open, yeah.
Christian Wade's out there for Buffalo. What a story he is.